what local individuals actually want, that's when NGOs can build the coalition that's necessary to affect change. And so that change requires action both at the international level and at the domestic level. And so that, requires that NGOs really take the local into consideration.
May I ask, can you speak more broadly about the female genital mutilation, your argument around that? Now, I've never heard
Sure.
of the counter argument, which I think is very, in and of itself, in a vacuum, refreshing to hear a counter argument to something that we've been indoctrinated to knee jerk say is bad. Now, your argument is much more nuanced and involves the local identity that I'm not judging on, but it's. Can you speak more about your approach to the concept, not only of this example, but of our approach to cultural varieties? And you compare it to breast implants in the West. So can you please expand on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the work there draws on some really good work by Professor Boyle at the University of Minnesota. So the argument that I have in the book and the argument that really draws from her is this idea that in order to affect kind of really culturally kind of human rights that can sometimes be seen as culture dependent, that you really have to build this local coalition. And so going in on an issue like female genital cutting, if an NGO was to get involved in that issue and just come at it from the global setting, right? Not build that local coalition, that would be an issue where you could see a lot of hypocrisy. So you could see kind of, let's say a Western NGO comes in and gets to work on that issue. You could see local leaders saying, wait a second, female genital cutting is the same or similar to male circumcision. It's the same or similar to breast augmentation. And those are issues that you as an NGO aren't focusing on. You're focusing on this issue, which you see as non-Western.
A hot topic.
A hot topic, yeah. And so what Elizabeth Boyle's work shows is that if a NGO comes in and works on that issue, when they did, with respect to female genital cutting, if they didn't build that local coalition, that it can backfire, and it can backfire in a really negative way. So it can actually lead to people saying, well, no, this is part of my identity. This practice is culturally relevant.
Yes.
I don't want to align myself with these outsiders that are only interested in supporting some sort of international norm that isn't relevant to me. And so it can actually help build a coalition against a practice as opposed to around some sort of international norm.
That's something now independent of genital mutilation, which is a serious problem, I believe.
Absolutely,
independent of that, I think many countries suffer from a problem of cultural pollution, where they're trying to force their culture onto other cultures, and they're polluters in a way.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think the international norm literature would say that if you're just pushing, right, without trying to reach that understanding, that it can be really ineffective. It can pollute, as you're saying, as opposed to actually change opinions and change preferences that lead to lasting change.
Yeah, because the main key issue is that we're not listening to other cultures and other identities to see, is this really, not in this case, but is this practice in your life really, do you really not like it, or do you really, not in this case, but in other cultural settings?
Yeah, what are the underlying clauses? What are the, kind of this idea of understanding where someone is coming from.
Just paying attention to both sides of any story, be it Black Lives Matter or genital mutilation, or just having a nuanced approach to that dynamic of racism, because it always takes two sides to do something like that. For example, my example I often use is when they caught Osama bin Laden and they dumped his body in the Persian Gulf. and for sharks to feed on. I think
Mm-hmm.
that produces a bit of cultural pollution for the entire region, because it's a huge problem that they just dumped onto the
Sure.
whole area. So for these people of the region, they can't really cross that sea without entirely thinking about who's been just dumped in there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, really interesting.
Yeah. So, can you speak about the TAN framework and its vulnerabilities?
Yeah, sure. So, my work and lots of work, as I'm sure you know, in international relations on NGOs, draws on some work that Keck and Sekink did in 1998. Keck and Sekink are the two authors about the Transnational Advocacy Network, which is the TAN. So, the Transnational Advocacy Network is um, a really idealized but a really interesting way to think about how advocacy works, or it did work at a certain time. So it's this idea that you have these international actors that can respond to domestic needs. And so let's say you have a big organization that responds to a call out from a local NGO that they need some help on an issue. So the local NGO can't affect change. They can't get somebody out of prison. They can't, have a change in domestic policy unless this international NGO gets involved. And the international NGO gets involved. They help amplify the message of that local organization. Bring the issue to the UN. Bring the issue to third-party countries that are interested. Get some pressure from above on that same kind of country. And so it's that combination of that local and the international that together can affect change. And so Keck and Sekink call that whole process the boomerang model. And the actors that are central to that process, especially NGOs, they're called the TAN, that Transnational Advocacy Network. And so the basic idea there is that it's not just one organization, but it's this network of organizations that Keck and Sekink say are all kind of working on the same principal goal.
I find it interesting that you quoted that NGOs were a second superpower during the Cold War.
I guess it's been a while since I wrote that book. So that was the heyday. If you think about the end of the Cold War,
Yeah.
Up until kind of maybe 10, 15 years ago, that was kind of the heyday for NGOs. Unfortunately, I think we're past that right now. We're now into an era of backlash towards NGOs and international NGOs.
Yeah, you're right.
But, up until maybe 10, 15 years ago, I think NGOs were collectively this force for change.
Mm-hmm. Finally, I'm fascinated in your book, which you can tell I've read.
Thanks. Yeah, definitely, absolutely. You know it better than I do at this point. Yeah.
Well, maybe it's a good refresher.
Yeah, definitely.
Your game. A lot of historians, by trade, I'm a historian, are using the game theory approach to, like, even the Battle of Waterloo.
Sure.
Can you explain the game theory approach? I find it fascinating, and how you've applied it to you're using mathematics and something that comes from the Rand Corporation to NGOs.
Yeah, that's a really nice way to say it. So I like to think of game theory as it's just a way to formalize and be explicit about what your assumptions are. So you have to be explicit about who the actors are that are important for your theory. You have to be explicit about what their preferences are. And you have to be explicit about how they're interacting and the rules in which kind of their game of interaction, whether that is two people deciding where to go for dinner, or whether it's an NGO interacting with a country, what the rules are for that interaction.
So how does it work? Is it just two things? Is it like one is one option A, option B, and then you go through it?
Yeah, no, it doesn't have to be. So I think I do think a lot of game theory tends to be very basic. So we try to boil things down to as basic as we can. So sometimes that is just two options, and we can get the dynamic we want with just a few actors and two options.
So it's along the way, it's alternatives along the way for many options?
Yeah, it's your hand. Or it can be multiple options. Like you could have a
Okay,
game that's
okay.
actually, so lots of bargaining games actually have a continuous option set. So you can
Oh,
set
cool.
your bid for a car between 0 and infinity, right? And so
Yeah.
there's kind of infinite number of options on that bargaining line. So yeah, absolutely. But I think you're exactly right. We tend to be as basic as possible, both to make the math easy on us, and also because sometimes the dynamics, once you start thinking about them, it doesn't make sense to have all of those options. You can still have the same tension that's driving kind of the theoretical kind of argument you're making, or the theoretical idea that's important. You can still have those dynamics in a very basic game.
Okay. And did you have any questions for me, Amanda?
No, this is fantastic. Fantastic. Are there anything that you would like? I guess I'm teaching in the next year. I'm teaching a couple of classes for undergraduates, and then I'm teaching one class for master's students. And for you, in your organization, when you think about what skills that students need right now, what kind of skills should I be focusing on teaching these students?
Well, I think I have a brother who works at the University of Pittsburgh, who
Oh, cool.
he works a lot on mindset and active learning. I think
Yeah,
everybody
absolutely.
could learn from his lectures, especially undergraduate and master's students. So like I'll
Oh,
send you the
cool.
link to some of his speeches.
Yeah, please do.
Okay,
Yeah, that's
great.
awesome.
Well, thank you very
Yeah,
much,
thanks so much.
Professor Murdy.
Yeah, have a great rest of your day and a great week.
Okay, bye now.
Bye.